So tonight on Newsnight, we're taking an in-depth look at where Nigeria's security problems could be stemming from, the proliferation of small arms in the country. In 2017, West Africa had about 500 million small arms in circulation. About 70% of these were in Nigeria. Faith All begins our coverage.
Insecurity is rife across Nigeria. Kidnappings, armed robbery, attacks by insurgents. All of these criminal groups have easy access to weapons. In 2017, there was about 350 million small arms in the country. Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation, but there's still more weapons than people. Out-of-date laws are being blamed for the problem. The laws that deal with small arms in Nigeria date from 1959. Because of this, lawmakers are pushing for a national commission to tackle the issue. Nigeria is one of the few countries in the world without such a panel. There is a presidential committee against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, but critics say it lacks legitimacy, legislative backing, and doesn't have enough of a budget. Nigeria is now the hub for these weapons, but it didn't start here.
In, out, on guard!
Wars in Sierra Leone and Liberia, as well as conflicts in Ivory Coast and Mali, led to huge numbers of small weapons swamping the region. The descent of Libya into war and mercenaries returning to West Africa from there saw the numbers swell even further. At one stage, Somalia was seen as a focal point. The availability of small arms meant militants could attack ships. But the maritime issue has also moved to Nigeria. The Gulf of Guinea is now one of the most dangerous waterways in the world. It borders the Niger Delta, where stolen crude is exchanged for arms, while the southeastern part is noted for local arms manufacturing. More than 60% of locally made weapons originate there.
Most of the arms come into the country either from land route and sea route. One pattern we have observed over time is that most of the guys who buy stolen crude bring in arms in exchange for crude. That's a common pattern you observe in the Niger Delta region. And because of the tributaries and the creeks, it's actually very difficult.
Nigeria is what's known as a country of origin, transit and destination for small arms. There are well over 350 illegal routes that lead directly to Cameroon and Chad. Libyan rebels exchange money for arms along these paths. Nigeria's borders are porous, which allows black market cartels to freely move arms around. There's an estimated 1,500 illegal entry points around the country. They're unmanned, unprotected, and mostly unknown to security agencies. Nigeria's customs service intercepts thousands of arms every year, but it's not enough. There are still instances of planes fully loaded with arms and ammunition arriving in the country. Nigeria may be bearing the brunt of this problem in West Africa, but it's far from alone. Small weapons have killed more people around the world than weapons of mass destruction. As former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan put it, there are enough small arms and ammunitions to shoot every man, woman and child on the planet twice. Faith Orr, Arise News.
Well, joining us now is a former lawmaker, member of the House of Nigeria's, House of Representatives, Honorable Nnenna Elendo Ukeje. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very
on
much.
Newsnight.
Thank you. Super excited to be
Yes, one fundamental question that it's been asked over and over again is how did we get to a place where every day there are reports of, security breaches, terrorist attacks, banditry and all of that, and that's been linked to arms proliferation. You have tried to come up with a law. You've sponsored a bill twice,
yes.
2013 and 2017. Tell us about that. And why it's become so important.
Well, I'm glad, like I said initially, I'm super excited to be here to have this conversation with you about the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Before 2013, when I decided to sponsor the bill against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons and hopefully get Nigeria to set up a commission on against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. That conversation was a fringe conversation. It was up in the air. But of course, with all the wars in the Nano River Basin, from Sierra Leone to Liberia, and all the conflicts, at the time there were about 25 conflicts, active or smoldering conflicts in Africa. And it became a conversation within the United Nations. Now, West Africa came to Abuja incidentally in 1998 and came up with a moratorium. Now, this moratorium was supposed to set up a government-led, a state-led arms proliferation aversion committee that would stop the proliferation of small arms.
That's the National Convention on Small
No, that wasn't
Arms?
the, no,
Okay,
that was the moratorium.
Okay.
Now, in the moratorium, Section 4 of the agenda of that moratorium stated that there shall be a committee on the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Now, that was in 1998 in Abuja. Fast forward to 2001, the United Nations came up with the United Nations Program of Action. Now, at the United Nations Program of Action, every country assented to that law, that there was need for them to do something about the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Now, at the time, Ambassador Joy Ogwu was Nigeria's permanent rep at the United Nations, and she was prophetic in saying that even though the words of the United Nations Program of Action sounded very good, that the work of the United Nations Program of Action was actually going to be in the commitment of the countries to domesticate that law. Now, after that, they said at the United Nations that all the countries should go back to their regions and set up commissions against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Nigeria, of course, ratified that law in 2006. We came back to West Africa, set it up, ratified the law in 2006, and after that, nothing happened. It is a record in West Africa that 13 countries had ratified, set up the Commission Against the Proliferation of Small Arms and Light Weapons. The only two countries that hadn't were Nigeria and the Gambia, even though it started in Nigeria.
So as of 2013
Yes.
then, what inspired you or what motivated you to say that we've got to do something? 1998, this meeting, 2006, everybody is ratified. Why don't we have a law? What motivated you to push this?
So many things. I mean, initially we started to listen, to hear the little drum beats of secessionist movements. We started to talk about the Niger Delta, and there was just so many scary guns. Now, as a lawmaker, most of the time we think in terms of laws. Now, what laws can we pass to mitigate whatever is going on? It was very important at the time that there was already a treaty, and the job of the National Assembly is ratification of treaties. And so there was a treaty, but nobody was doing anything about it. We needed that vehicle to deal with the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Now, what we have today, by comparison to what we had then seems like a tea party, because I mean, every day we have that. But it was almost instructive, because there was this article in the papers. I don't quite remember what paper it was, but the headlines was guns, guns everywhere. And there was just so many bullets, and it was so scary. And so I thought to myself that since there was already, and at the time I was the chair of the Committee on Foreign Relations, we had waited for them to ratify this treaty. Nobody was doing anything. It was obvious, as they said, that Nigeria was a country of source, Nigeria was a country of transit, and Nigeria was a country of destination. The numbers were mind-boggling. It was said to us that of the 500 million guns in circulation, 70 million were in sub-Saharan, when West Africa, Nigeria, had 10 million of those guns. And as a lawmaker, we think in terms of laws, and I thought that we had to do something to fast-track the movement and hopefully stem the tide.
So help us understand what exactly this bill is expected to address if it does become law.
Okay. Now, first and foremost, I think that that's the first step for government to have a vehicle that drives the conversation, that drives the national conversation. A lot of these conversations in all the other countries are had at a place where Nigeria cannot come into. It's a sine qua non. It doesn't say that you may. These moratoriums, the sections 24 and section 24 says there shall be a national movement against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. In the absence of that, which is what we have, a presidential committee, we're not in the room where the conversations are had. Now, Nigeria in the last couple of years have had so many theaters of violence. What this committee was supposed to do is to go in there and mop up this theaters of violence. It is supposed to hopefully take a list of stockpiles of military stockpiles that we have. It was also going to drive the engagement on a multilateral level with other countries around the world in the hope that we may learn how to deal with the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Most of the numbers we have are guesstimates. They were going to set up a database
to actually have an idea of the actual numbers.
Exactly.
Now,
I was just going to ask the question that in 2013 then,
Yes.
you pushed this bill, you
Yes.
pushed the agenda,
Yes.
you got the support of your peers in the House of Rep, it was ratified, endorsed. Senate endorsed the same thing. What was it that made it impossible
go
for
through?
President Jonathan at that point to sign it into bill? In just 30 seconds, because we'll continue the conversation after the break.
I don't know, quite frankly, but I think that, I think where it was going to be domiciled was a huge problem. I think that at the time it was also a fringe problem, as I said, and it just wasn't on the plate, as it were. It wasn't on the front burner of government at the time, because I don't think the government was able to foresee that we're going to get to where we are today.
We'll continue the conversation after the break. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll bring you more on this issue of proliferation of small arms in Nigeria.
welcome back. You're watching Newsnight from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Now, the world's first and only global treaty on firearms was adopted in 2001. It's the United Nations Firearms Protocol, and it aims to promote and strengthen links between countries to eradicate the illegal manufacturing and trafficking of firearms and ammunition. Well, Brazil and Mali were among the first to sign up. It now has 118 signatories. But not all the countries that have signed it have ratified it, like you heard from our guest earlier. France is the only one of the top 6 arms exporting nations to have done so, while the other 5, China, Russia, Germany, UK, and the USA, have not. Well, French officials say they are aware of the particular responsibility that falls upon France as an arms exporting country.
They've joined European partners in promoting an arms trade treaty to impose a new global standard and place responsibility on exporting states. The treaty puts an emphasis on human rights by banning the export of all kinds of arms when there is a risk of genocide or crimes against humanity. France is working with African nations to make sure the treaty includes small arms and light weapons. These weapons cause over 500,000 deaths each year and are responsible for almost 90% of the victims of armed conflicts. The main victims are too often civilians, among whom women and children are particularly affected. So still with us is Representative, former honorable member of the House of Reps in Nigeria, Nina Alendo Keje. So let's continue the conversation.
Yes.
We're talking about 2013, and I'm looking in my notes and I'm looking at, you mentioned earlier, guns everywhere in one of the newspapers, and I guess it must have been several newspapers that carried that story. And in my research, I noticed that there was series of attacks all over the country, throughout the northwest, northeast, north central of Nigeria, between 2012 and 2013, which is around the time that you were pushing for this agenda to be addressed. So I was wondering, why will the president not look at the problem and say, this is one of the solutions? Why was it not done? That's the answer you were trying to give us there.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the former president. I mean, I don't know why he didn't, but I can hazard a guess. And like I said, guns everywhere. But again, where to domicile it was probably a problem. And I think that in response to the cry, to the hue and cry, they came up with a presidential committee. And, you know, at the risk of tooting my horn, the Ambassador Imohe at the time, who was appointed to head the presidential committee, had actually given us a commendation and had said it was due in no small part to the amount of work that we had done in pushing it and bringing it from a fringe conversation to a mainstream conversation. Now, I also know that the ratification of that treaty was a little difficult. Now, as to why the president refused to assent to it, as I said earlier on, your guess is as good as mine.
So let's even talk about the drivers of this proliferation of arms.
Yes.
I mean, we just talked about the global efforts to control arms. How effective would you say that these global efforts are, especially when you consider the fact that there's huge global trade? I mean, some people are making money off this small arms and light weapons sale, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, evidently. Evidently, there's so many people making a lot of money from the small arms, the light weapons sale. But the world will be a safer place if there were government mechanisms to check it. Now, for instance, you just heard that France has said that, you know, manufacturing companies have to set up. Now, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, it's something that absolutely must be done. But then again, we have to be in the room to hold the manufacturing countries to account. Only recently, there was a pilot scheme that involved 7 African countries. Now, these 7 African countries were supposed to look at and go and learn how to deal with the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Nigeria was not in the room. And the reason, and it's so hurtful, because of the arms, especially in the sub-region, 70% of those arms are domiciled in Nigeria. And so if Nigeria, as huge as Nigeria is on the global scene, is not in a room to talk about pushing and calling out the countries, the manufacturing countries on the Arms Trade Treaty, to be a part of the commitment against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and we're not in that room, then it means that we're not even prepared to deal with something that is the scourge of our problem. Now, 10 million guns are in Nigeria, and I continue to say that that's a conservative estimate. The reason I say that...
Well, that particular report you even talk about earlier says 350.
Yes, I mean, there's so many, that's what I'm saying. So
it's unbelievable.
They're guesstimates, okay? Yeah. But then they say that there are 650 million guns in circulation. But in the last couple of years, because of all the problems that have been in the world, the resource control wars, government and governance issues, the rise in Islamist jihadism, and so on and so forth, we have seen that every year 8 million guns from 2015 have been added to those guesstimates of 650 million guns. And so the numbers that we continue to tout have not taken into account the fact that, for instance, with the success in Syria, they said that they had dislodged ISIS from Syria. Now, all the real estate that Syria lost that ISIS lost in Syria, they have found in the Lake Chad Basin in Nigeria, in the Lake Chad Basin with all the guns. And so we have seen an exacerbation of that. COVID as well has not helped, because lack of government structures, systems and institutions, weak governance, countries losing funds, and poverty, global poverty has exacerbated crimes.
But can we talk about this without addressing the issue of our porous borders? About 1,400 illegal borders?
Absolutely not.
What do we need to do to, to man these borders?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting that I asked this question, because Colonel Sagir, who used to be the spokesperson for the Nigerian army, had said that there were at least 250 illegal routes between Maiduguri and Damaturu into Chad and Mali. Now, we know that those places have unraveled in the last couple of years in that region alone. And so when you also look at what is happening in Lagos towards Idiroko, that is another interesting number of illegal routes. And then, of course, not to talk about the Lake Chad, the Gulf of Guinea with all that. Now, What can be done? Everybody has said all kinds of things, from using technology to man the borders to shutting down the borders. I mean, Nigeria only just opened up her borders a couple of months ago. The question is that having shut down the borders for over a year, did it work? Evidently not.
No.
So
that brings me to the point where I want to ask another question, which is 2017 this bill was represented to the House and then the Senate, both approved, both endorsed, and it's said to be at the table of the president from around then. That's about 3-4 years ago that it's being endorsed by the two houses. Do you know why it's not been signed into law yet?
I'll tell you what happens within the legislature. At the end of a legislative session, which is 4 years, if a bill is not assented to, it has to start de novo. And I know that a very competent member of parliament, now Honorable Mongunu, who's been there for 5 terms, has taken up this bill. And for him, it's existential because he's from Maiduguri, he's from the northeast region of Nigeria. And I know that he's a very competent member of parliament. I'm hoping that, you know, as he has presented it again, my legislative baby, I'm hoping that finally it sees the light of day, because for us it's existential. Some people have called Nigeria a fragile state. Some people have said Nigeria is unraveling in ways. Every part of the country, there's a different, unique form of insecurity, from ethno-religious crisis to government crisis to secessionist movements to resource control movements to all that. And so, you know, Nigeria is basically unraveling. And I think that now more than anything else, this bill is existential to the life of Nigeria. I think that Nigeria must be seen to be doing something institutional that speaks to the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. We've been talking about this bill for the longest time. We've been talking about rolling back. But if we're not in the room to talk about a global movement, to holding the manufacturing countries to account, to having a real conversation about the production of AK-47s, by the way, that's the weapon of choice. They call it the weapon of destruction. And we're not in the room to hold these other countries to account, then it's going to be very difficult for us to even say that we're trying to do anything about the proliferation of small arms and light weapons.
And I wish we had enough time to even ask you about developments unraveling in Imo State, your part of the country, where
jailbreaks, that's very interesting. And, you know, that's a totally different dimension
we have
to this insecurity issue. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, we'll take a break now. So we'll take a break. When we come back, there'll be more stories. Don't go away. Okay, welcome back. You're still on the Rise News, and this is Newsnight. And we still have with us former honorable member of the House of Rep, and she's
all right, yes, you were trying to make that point about situations unraveling in Imo State.
Yeah, and I think that we see one of the greatest ways of getting these illicit weapons is by stealing government stockpiles. And so we find that, you know, what we've been reading is that they're going into police stations, sacking police stations and stealing from the armory. Now that is one way the non-state actors arm themselves. And so when you see that kind of trend, we saw it happen in Maiduguri, we're seeing it here as well. And, you know, it's just to stockpile on these illicit arms.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Nena Elendu Ukeje, representative, former House of Reps member, representing Bende Federal Constituency in Abia State. It's been a delight having you on Newsnight.
Thank you so much, and I'm hoping that this conversation just brings to the fore the problems of proliferation.
We will have to continue this
I hope so. I most definitely hope so.
We haven't even scratched the surface yet.
All right. Thank you so much.